You know, the book of Philemon will forever live in a sort of infamy in my mind. Because as we concluded my first year of studying Greek in college, that was our final project. Our professor said, I want you to take the book of Philemon and I want you to translate it from beginning to end into your own translation. And so to this day, of all the 66 books in the Bible, Philemon is the only one that has a Josh translation. And it probably wasn't a very good one. But I'll tell you what, you spend that much time looking at a text and you realize what a tremendous amount of work the translators have gone through to give us Bibles in every language. It is a phenomenal task to try to figure out how to take Greek and move it to English. Now, what does this have to do with you and why do I bring this up? Well, even as much time as I spent in Philemon in that project, I walked away from that project thinking to myself, how on earth is the book of Philemon applicable to me as a Christian? How is it applicable in my life in any way whatsoever? I don't get it. How do I use this book to help me grow as a man? How do I use this book to help me grow as a Christian? And I'll tell you, as we talk about knowing one this week and the power of one, it became very, very clear and very evident that Philemon has a lot of value to us as we think about what it means to truly know someone. So that's the question we begin with. We are in week 6 of the power of one, and we're looking at what it means to know one, for each one of us to know someone, to know them deeply. So let's begin with that question. What does it truly mean to know someone? That's the question we're asking. That's the question I encourage you to be asking yourselves in your small groups. You know, the Bible encourages us to be a relational people. It encourages us to know. But the question is, who does the Bible encourage us to know? And I think what we'll find is that there's 3 facets, there's 3 aspects to knowing that's presented to us in the Bible. You know, I think the first is most obvious, right? The Bible encourages us to know God. The Bible wants us to have a deep relationship with God. In our message, we looked at Exodus chapter 33 and how Moses desired to know God and to see his glory. So the Bible wants us to know God. And I'm reminded of Matthew chapter 7, where Jesus says in the Bible that in the last days, many will come to him and will say, Lord, Lord. And his response will be, I never knew you. I never knew you. And so he says, I'll say, away from me, you evildoers. So knowing in the Bible is a huge, huge part of our faith. Knowing God, knowing Christ is huge, but it doesn't stop there. The Bible also encourages us to know his church, to know his people, and it encourages us to know those outside of the church, those who are not currently his people, but he sure wants to be. And so I think as we talk about knowing God, knowing the church, and knowing those outside of the church, we have to recognize that there's this really strong, amazing parallel there between that and our purpose as a church, to love God, to love others, and to teach others to love God. There's a great deal of parallel between those 2 things. But in any case, whatever we're doing, we have to recognize that there are 2 must-haves in our relationships in our lives, whether that's knowing God or knowing other people, knowing his church, whatever it might be. There are 2 things we have to have. We talked about this in our message. Number 1, we have to have intent. And number 2, we have to have time. Because if we have all the greatest intent in the world to know other people, but we don't spend a significant amount of time with them, we're likely going to fail to get to know them. And if we have all the time in the world to get to know somebody, but we lack the great intent to do something productive with it, we're also likely going to fail to get to know them in any real, tangible way. And so, as you think about the one that you chose, I want you to ask yourself, do I know them, or do I simply know a little bit or a lot about them? And so I want you to open your books, open your Bibles to Philemon together as a group. And I want you to read this. And we'll read this in one of the later questions. And I want you to look at the value and the power of relationship, of intimacy, and of knowing someone deeply, and how Paul uses that between Onesimus and Philemon. Enjoy your discussion. For our first question, as we seek to know one, I want you guys to begin your discussion as a group. And I want you to try to get to know each other a little better. What is one thing that your group could learn about you that they don't already know about you? Or what is one thing that your group could learn about you that may surprise them? Talk about that amongst yourselves as a group. For our second question, I want you to think about the people in your life that you really know versus the people in your life that maybe you know a little bit about or maybe a lot about. I don't know. How many people in your life do you think truly know you? How many people in your life do you think you truly know with that level of intimacy? And I want you to talk about this. What differentiates knowing someone from simply knowing a little bit about them? What is that difference? Talk about that as a group. For your third question, I want you to read Philemon together as a group, because Philemon is this story, this letter written by Paul, where he's leveraging the relationships that he has between two people that he knows and seems to know really, really well. We're talking about Philemon, a slave owner, and Onesimus, a slave or former slave that Paul knows quite well. And Onesimus used to be Philemon's slave, and so Paul is actually mediating between Philemon and Onesimus. And I want to ask you, what do you notice, or what stands out to you about the way that Paul speaks about Onesimus, and what stands out to you about the way that Paul speaks to Philemon? So how does knowing Philemon work to Paul's advantage in this letter? And what do we learn about relationship from that? So as we reflect on Philemon, we recognize that Philemon is an example of the power of intent in our relationships. And so as you reflect on what it means to truly know someone, rather than just knowing about them like we've been talking about, how can you use time and intent to increase the kingdom, not for our own glory? This isn't so we have more Facebook friends, but for God's glory, to bring glory to Him and to further the kingdom, especially with the one that you chose as part of the power of one. How can you use that relationship for God's glory? Talk about that amongst your group. I want to thank you for joining us for week 6 of The Power of One as we look at what it means to truly know someone. Each one of us know one person. And so think about that person that you chose. Think about whether you know them. And if you need to invest more time or show more intent in that relationship, we want to encourage you to do that. And I encourage your small group to hold you accountable to that. Encourage one another to be intentional, to show and invest more time. And through doing that, you will deepen your relationships, you will get to know one another, and you will have a tremendously bigger impact in getting them to know Christ, the creator of the universe. God bless you guys. Enjoy your discussion and have a great week.